So today, actually, I want to present you my research, which combines two main areas of my research recently and topically now. The one is national minority councils or self-governments or NTA institutions in the area of former Yugoslavia, in this case Slovenia. And the other topic of my research and interest, the monitoring of the implementation of Framework Convention, which is primarily done by the advisory committee. So in this paper, I looked at the monitoring documents on implementation of the Framework Convention for the protection of national minorities in Slovenia, and I analyzed to what extent self-governing national communities in Slovenia are present there, acknowledged as actors for that facilitate or play some role in implementing rights enshrined in the convention. So before sharing with you my main findings, I would like to explain two contextual or conceptual questions. First, the very concept of self-governing communities. So next slide, please. These self-governed national communities are one of the peculiarities of Slovenian model, which is actually very developed and minority-friendly system, with one small limitation that covers only two autochthonous groups, Hungarian and Italian, with some also rights and autonomy prospects for Roma minority. I was focused here on the Italian and Hungarian minority because only these two groups enjoy the full scale of minority protection in Slovenia, and one of the main feature of this system is existence of the self-governing national communities. Peculiarity, maybe from some of you interesting who are really deeply involved in the NTA system, is that these self-governing communities have roots in the socialist Yugoslavia system and were established actually in the 70s as part of Yugoslavian socialism, modern, so this self-governing socialism. This is not, but I was also surprised when I was in Slovenia to learn that this is one of the legacies of former Yugoslavia, which was then kept in Slovenia in the 90s and is also up to date, one of the peculiarities of the Slovenian model, together with the reserved seats of Italian and Hungarian groups or communities in Slovenia in the parliaments and local assemblies. So these are two channels for minority participation in Slovenia. The bodies are entrenched in the constitution. There is also a law specified and dealing only with these bodies, adopted, as I mentioned, in 1994. And there are, as I said, it's interesting that this model combines both personal and territorial elements, in terms that the bodies are based on the personal element, in terms that the councils of these self-governing communities are elected by persons who are enrolled in special voting registers, so belonging to Italian or Hungarian minority. But interestingly, there is also a territorial element where these bodies exist only in so-called ethnically mixed areas. There are also on two levels, local and municipal and umbrella self-governing communities. Their role is, you can also see it as a slide, implementation of special minority rights, promotion of minority needs and interests, and the core actually task or competence is actually their channel for minority participation in public affairs, and in that sense the most of their competencies lie in so-called shared rule, especially in education and media when their representatives can participate in different state bodies or expert board, or name it, where decisions are made, and somehow try to voice minority concern and have some say in decision that has been made. On the other hand, so the other channel, please next slide, the other channel of investigation in this paper is the Framework Convention and implementation of Framework Convention in Slovenia. Slovenia has ratified, or the Framework Convention is in force in Slovenia since 1998 from the very beginning, and so far 4 monitoring cycles have been gone through, and fifth monitoring cycle is in process now. The monitoring cycles, as I suppose most of you know, is based on dialogue mechanism starting with the state report, going through the field visit of advisory committee, opinion of the advisory committee, then governmental comments, and finally resolution of the committee of the ministers. And these are the documents which I identified, analyzed in order to see how these self-governing communities are present in these monitoring documents. Next slide, please. In analyzing all these documents, I have identified that self-governing communities, to some extent, have appeared in the following areas. One question was personal scope of application was one of the issues. Then usual and core minority rights, culture, media, language use. Then education, participation in public affairs, territorial organization, and cross-border cooperation. On the other hand, so one could say, okay, maybe throughout the whole Framework Convention, but it was not that in all these issues, through all four monitoring cycles, the presence or appearance of the self-governing communities were of the same intensity, and that it was throughout the issues and throughout the monitoring cycles, but it was different. Some issues emerge and disappeared, then they re-emerge, or it was not so present, let's say, on the same level as in culture and as in let's say as in media. So, for time reasons, maybe I will not go into detail. I presented here on the PowerPoint all the elements, but maybe only briefly that the most most visible are self-governing self-governing communities, national communities in education. They have really are, let's say, most visible through their status of co-founders of educational institutions on local level, or primary education and secondary education, and somehow in this area you can see the most potential for impact for these self-governing communities. Media is also an area where the presence, again through participation of minority representatives who are delegated by the self-governing communities. Self-governing communities have a channel, notwithstanding the free press principle and free media, that they have a channel to the RTV Slovenia and to management of Slovenian public media. On the other hand, reports and opinions are totally ignorant or are silent about minority media run by self-governing communities. The issue of personal scope of application was also problematic about a special voting register. I will not, but it was commented, it was mostly brought to attention by the Italian representatives. Due to lack of time, I will not address it now, but we can discuss it if you want later. It was also the issue, a problematic issue was also the level of participation, of the quality of participation of self-governing national communities under Article 15, because there is an article in the Slovenian law obliging state authorities to require opinion of self-governing communities when making decisions relevant for minorities, and apparently state authorities didn't do or haven't followed this legal obligation as set in the law, so that the Italian and Hungarian representatives had to intervene and ask, and then the government also issued a recommendation to the state, to the old state governmental bodies, to take care about this, legal provision. Interestingly enough, the most attention to the self-governing national community has been given in relation to cross-border cooperation, and most information on these bodies I really found in the fifth monitoring cycle under Article 18, so cross-border and cooperation with the kin state. And apparently, from the state perspective, the main role or the main role for the self-governing communities was seen to support or to facilitate cooperation with the kin state and minority co-nationals living in other countries. To the conclusion now, due to time, you need to skip now because it's can you the one back? So what are my main findings? So as some of this is something what I found also in Serbia, in Germany, and so it's maybe general, but nevertheless, Slovenian reporting is mainly focused on normative framework, and you can see, especially in state reports, like pages of norms of law, constitution, and laws, and regulations, and sometimes it's really quotations of paragraph this and article that, and how everything is super great regulated, but there is only limited information of how this normative framework has been implemented and what are the impacts in practice, especially also when it comes to the actors who are in charge of this practice, and then what was of my interest, the self-governing national communities. Then something what came as a surprise for me from the Slovenian example, because I thought that when I was in Slovenia that the system is very open to minority, that there is a lot of dialogue between minority and the government or state authorities, but on the other hand, reports are very hardly state-driven. So there is very little about minority perspective. There is very little input from the self-governing national communities or other minority actors, like it could be also Unità Italiana or name it, other organizations. So minority voice is very hardly to hear from these reports. And on the other hand, actually, this minority perspective could be more taken from the opinions of the advisory committee, because, as you know, when advisory committee does field study visit, then it also or talks to the minority representatives. In this context, I could also observe from the state reports, but this is also what I observed in Slovenia. I was in Slovenia, that the position is more patronizing. So state sees these self-governing national communities not as an equal partner. Okay, there is a power, disbalance, that is for sure, but there is this attitude as if these are some minority organizations who are beneficiaries of state supports. State gives money and you do, and so there is this attitude of self-governing national communities as beneficiaries, and budgetary, let's say, also beneficiaries, but there is no this acknowledgement of these institutions as minority agents, that they can really make some difference, and they can really make somehow minority concerns to be not only heard but also taken into consideration when making official decision of the state authorities and so on. In the hand, really, there is a great potential of these self-governing national communities. The range of their competences and possibilities to participate in decision making is really remarkable. When you look at it from desk research, let's say. On the other hand, also doing this based on this analysis on state report or monitoring documents, but also from my experience in Slovenia, which was not part of my paper. I focused or limited my paper only on this desk research and monitoring documents, that these institutions, minority institutions, are regrettably underused in practice, and this is also visible in the monitoring documents. So their potential is not used as it could be. Thank you very much. So questions we do, so I don't know what, as you say, so maybe.
I think we have time for questions after the presentation.
Yeah, okay. After the presentation. Okay, as you say. So either we do final.
More focused, I think.
More focused than the questions in the presentation. Yes?
No, just
okay.
Respond now.
Okay.
Ask questions now.
I think
Ask questions now. Okay.
Yeah, I had two questions, Lucas, if I could. First, I was interested in what you said about the criteria for enrolment, the issues there. If you could say a little bit more, and whether they were similar or different for the Hungarian and Italian communities. And the second is more general, given what you've said, given what you've told us about the nature of the ACFC process, what would be your reflections on it, and possible recommendations on how to improve it?
Andrea, please. Thank you. This was very, very interesting. What I found really interesting was you talked about shared rule. Could you define or explain how it works? And why is it called shared rule? Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you. My question would be, when you said that these monitoring documents are mostly state-driven, and I had the same experience in Serbia as well concerning the NTA councils in Serbia. How these self-governing communities participate in the monitoring process? So what did they say? Whether they were positive or negative, or what were their main issues? So you understand?
Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question? If we don't, I ask Ljubica to answer in 5 or 6 minutes.
Oh, good. So, all great questions. Thank you very much. So, criteria for enrollment was, it's generally a very interesting topic Europe-wide, but in Slovenia it was also addressed by the Constitutional Court. So, in Slovenia, it's not only the principle of self-identification that counts. So, it's not as, for example, in Serbia, that everyone can go to the electoral office, or how is it called, and say, I want to be enrolled, but there is also a need for the self-governing community to accept, let's say, this. So there is some kind of application. So it's 2 steps. One is one part is declaration of the person of the belonging to this specific group, and then each self-governing national community has a commission on enrollment, and then this commission decides, yes, you can be enrolled, or we don't want to enroll you, and then this decision of the commission is sent to the state body managing the special electoral rolls, which then make enrollment. What was the problem in Slovenia? The problem was that there were no criteria for the commission to decide about this enrollment, whether they accept the person or not. And then there was a case before the Constitutional Court, I think 1994, mid-90s, and then Constitutional Court ordered the lawmaker to make some kind of clarification of criteria for decision on enrollment in the special electoral law, and that was, although there, generally it's for self-governing communities to decide on these objective criteria. Nevertheless, the lawmaker made, I think it was, but it is also interesting, the dynamic. The Constitutional Court made a decision in mid-90s, and the law was amended only, I think, in 2010, or it's in my paper. So it was with, you can also see with what kind of delay. And then they, but so although it's for self-governing national communities to define the criteria, the lawmaker made some kind of framework of these criteria. I can find, but for time reasons, I can also, you can, so there are 3 types of criteria: long-lasting link with the community, and so on, language knowledge. So there are 3 types of criteria. But still, it is a tricky question in Slovenia even today, not so much for the self-governing national communities, but for the election of 2 MPs, because both Italian and Hungarian minority, or community as Slovenians say it, they have reserved seats in the parliament, and people enrolled in this special register can participate in this election, candidate and vote, and this is when actually where the issue is more problematized than in relevance to self-governing communities. So more about where is power, and power is with MPs. So and about monitoring, yeah, this is a very good question, and this is something what I'm also doing now with Serbia, another project and another paper. Yeah, it's about advisory committee pushes countries to do evidence-based monitoring and to present more data on implementation and more data on, and somehow more substantial reports. But also advisory committees, not very, I don't know whether they have, the monitoring is more based on dialogue, and it's not so rigid in terms of benchmarks and checklists and so on and so forth. So there is also, the question is to what extent also the monitoring of the advisory committee could be more structured and more somehow. This is also, maybe in a few months I can tell you more, because it's work in progress on some other area. Yeah. Shared rule. So this is a term from theory. It means, because sometimes it's sole rule, or how is it called? Maybe you can help me, Federica. Sometimes there is really autonomy competencies where these bodies can take their decisions on their own. But self-rule. On the other hand, so shared rule is when a decision maker is state authority, let's say it, whereas in order to make this decision, actually this decision maker needs to have an opinion or proposal or some participation of the minority organization, in this case self-governing. For example, in Slovenia, if they want, if a school has to wants to adopt the school plan, then self-governing national community needs to approve this school plan. It's not that this organization or self-governing community could just say it's ours. So it's a communication between these two actors. Or if the Ministry of Education wants to change the network of schools, it cannot make it on there needs to be a consent of the self-governing national community. So it is not the self-governing national community who can decide about the network. That would be self-rule, but they can participate through giving a consent to some educational body about the network. This is shared rule. And participation in the process. So how there are different, and Flavia is just waving, so can I? Do we have to, so how they participate? There are different modes. In some instances, in some countries, states simply put put as an appendix to the state report also statements, or it could be reports of minority organizations. In Slovenian case, there was no such thing. I don't know to what extent there were roundtables or whatever channels for minorities, for self-governing national communities or minority MPs to participate in producing state reports. The only thing what I know is that when advisory committee comes to the study visit, it inevitably goes and talks to the minority organizations. On the other hand, there is this, in Slovenia, there is this office for national communities, and there is communication, but there is no strict, let's say, channel and formalized channel for participation of minority organizations, and this is a weak point, and this is something also what advisory committee encourages and urges even more countries to more systematically involve minority organizations in state reporting and in actually follow-up activities when it comes to the Framework Convention. But we think we can also discuss it in a coffee break or over lunch. Thank you very much for your questions.